When you think of cowboys, it's easy to imagine wild shootouts, rugged loners riding into the sunset, or maybe a dusty showdown in the middle of a deserted town. But are these images the real deal, or just Hollywood hype? The truth is, many things we think we know about cowboys are a far cry from reality. From what they wore to what they did daily, this iconic Old West figure was much different than the myths and legends we've come to love. Ready to separate fact from fiction? Here are 9 cowboy truths that are totally wrong.
Trysts on the Range. When Brokeback Mountain premiered in theaters in 2005, audiences were taken aback by the depiction of a romantic relationship between cowboys on the big screen. While the film presented a fictional narrative, it shone a light on a historical truth. Homosexual relationships among cowboys were more prevalent than many people might realize. Historians argue that the nature of a cowboy's work, often characterized by long periods spent isolated from society, created conditions that led to intimate relationships among men. Working in a confined space with often only one other person present fostered relationships that sometimes turned into romantic love. This perspective is supported not just by scholarly analysis, but also by tangible evidence. For example, researchers have discovered love poems exchanged between cowboys, indicating that emotional and physical connections were formed amidst the harsh realities of frontier life. Furthermore, the cowboy lifestyle allowed individuals to escape the societal norms and expectations that were more rigidly enforced in the eastern United States. Living on isolated homesteads meant that many men were free from the judgment that typically accompanied homosexual relationships. For those who identified as gay or were exploring their love, the remote and anonymous nature of the West provided an ideal setting to express their feelings without fear of societal repercussions. In an environment often lacking female companionship, it was not uncommon for like-minded men to seek solace in each other. Additionally, many cowboys were closeted gay men who intentionally distanced themselves from the conservative cultures of the East. The vastness of the frontier offered them the chance to reinvent their identities. They could find companionship and understanding among others who shared similar experiences and desires. While this phenomenon did not encompass all cowboys, it was significant enough to exist within frontier communities, persisting until the closing of the West. Thus, the romantic lives of cowboys were far more complex than the traditional narratives have often suggested, reflecting a rich tapestry of human experience that defies simplistic stereotypes. Don't fight, friends. Contrary to popular belief, the Old West was significantly less violent than many assume. While Hollywood has painted a picture of constant bank heists, relentless shootouts, and dramatic train robberies, the reality is often much more subdued. The portrayal of the frontier as a lawless land filled with chaos is more the result of entertainment narratives than historical accuracy. Consider this startling statistic. A study conducted by the University of Dayton in 2005 revealed that a single year in contemporary Ohio experienced more bank robberies than the entirety of the Old West over a decade. While the frontier certainly had its share of violence and lawlessness, incidents such as brawls, robberies, and gunfights were actually quite rare compared to the dramatized accounts we often see in films and novels. This brings us to the relationship between cowboys and their communities. Working alone or in small groups on ranches in rural areas necessitated a spirit of cooperation and neighborliness. Life on the frontier was undeniably tough. Diseases could spread rapidly, and injuries often occurred with little warning. Even basic necessities like food were not guaranteed, highlighting the precariousness of daily life. The rugged individualism often associated with figures like John Wayne misrepresents the reality of cowboy life. Although cowboys might have spent time alone or with just a few companions while working on ranches, maintaining positive relationships with neighbors and fellow townspeople was essential. These connections were crucial, especially when faced with emergencies or hardships. The practicalities of survival on the frontier made it evident that collaboration and community were far more beneficial than attempting to navigate life in isolation. Thus, the image of the lone cowboy, self-reliant and independent, stands in stark contrast to the interconnectedness that characterized much of life in the Old West. Cowboys weren't all white. In popular culture, representations of cowboys often lack diversity. Films like Django Unchained and Blazing Saddles provide notable exceptions, but for the most part, cowboy imagery is predominantly white. However, the reality of cowboy culture is much more nuanced. Some historians suggest that around a quarter of cowboys in the 19th century were black, with an additional significant portion being Hispanic. Though precise figures are harder to ascertain for these groups, particularly in the Southwest, it's clear that many non-white individuals, including Native Americans, contributed to cowboy life. Part of this diversity can be attributed to practical needs. In the expansive and often isolated regions of the frontier, landowners and ranchers required as much labor as they could find. Opportunities for manual labor were limited, so when a strong worker appeared, regardless of their race, they were welcomed with open arms. Additionally, the context of the time is crucial. While westward expansion occurred prior to the Civil War, it accelerated in the decades following the Confederacy's defeat. Racial attitudes were slow to change in the East, but out west, ranchers and farmers were eager to move forward and resume their work. Despite the opportunities that existed, black cowboys faced significant challenges. Racism and discrimination were pervasive, and the harsh realities of American life were not absent on the frontier. In fact, many of the duties assigned to black cowboys were particularly grueling. They often had to break wild horses, handle all the cooking during cattle drives, and participate in branding cattle on the home front. Yet even with these hardships, black cowboys enjoyed a degree of autonomy and respect that was often lacking for black individuals in the eastern states. This complex dynamic may explain why so many former enslaved people sought new beginnings in the West after the Civil War ended. They couldn't get no respect. In today's American culture, cowboys hold a respected and iconic status. From Hollywood classics to pop culture legends like John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, cowboys are celebrated figures. But back in the days when real cowboys roamed the plains, they weren't always seen in such a heroic light. In fact, many regarded them with far less admiration. Early frontier society often looked down on cowboys, viewing them as uneducated, unruly, and even as drifters with questionable habits. Ranchers and landowners were wary of hiring them, concerned about their reliability and work ethic. Cowboys were stereotyped as hard-drinking, rough-edged men, and few in polite society found much to admire in them. The nature of their work also didn't do much to help their reputation. Cowboys were notorious for driving cattle across farmers' lands, damaging crops in their path, all to turn a profit for their employers. In both the East and the West, cowboys often herded cattle over Native American lands, creating additional tensions. For farmers whose livelihoods depended on their crops, cowboys' actions came across as reckless, further spreading their poor reputation. For much of the 19th century, cowboys were seen as dirty, disease-ridden, and unruly by many in frontier society. However, as the 20th century arrived and the frontier closed, a nostalgic lens began to change how cowboys were viewed. Authors and early filmmakers crafted a new image, one of stoic heroes and rugged pioneers who tamed the Wild West. This romanticized cowboy quickly captured the public's imagination, transforming him into the beloved icon that remains embedded in global culture today. Support from where? If you think Americans have an exclusive love for cowboys in the Old West, think again. Across the Atlantic, Germany has a deep fascination with the American frontier. For over a century, Germans have been captivated by the tales of gunslingers, settlers, and life on the wild frontier. Today, this passion lives on in hundreds of private clubs across Germany, where enthusiasts dress as cowboys and recreate 19th century frontier life. These gatherings act like fantasy camps, letting people experience a version of the Old West. Some reports suggest that thousands of German cowboys flock to these clubs each weekend, immersing themselves in the history and drama of the American Southwest. This fascination isn't a recent trend either. Even in the 1930s, cowboy culture had fans in Germany, including Adolf Hitler, who viewed cowboys as symbols of rugged masculinity. Hitler admired their resilience and independence, seeing in them a model of strength. Known for his interest in Westerns, he was said to have read cowboy novels during his downtime. While the appeal of the cowboy myth has evolved, it's clear that the Old West has captured imaginations far beyond America's borders, bringing a unique piece of American history to fans around the world, including Germany. A gun-free gig. When we picture a cowboy, it's easy to imagine him with a gun strapped to his hip, ready for action. Movies and pop culture have cemented the idea that cowboys were armed at all times, much like outlaws of the Old West. But this image doesn't quite match the reality. In truth, 19th century cowboys weren't constantly armed or prepared to shoot at any moment. Forget the Hollywood-inspired shootouts. Cowboys focused on tasks like building fences, herding cattle, and caring for livestock, jobs that didn't require firearms. Sure, they might carry a weapon to fend off wild animals or potential thieves on the range, but guns weren't an everyday necessity. Adding to this was the fact that many Western towns had strict gun laws. Even in places like Tombstone, Arizona, firearms were often banned. Sheriffs and local officials sought to control the violence that sometimes plagued the frontier by requiring visitors to disarm upon entering town. Known outlaws like Billy the Kid might ignore these rules, but most law-abiding cowboys complied, preferring not to stir up trouble with the law. So while tales of gunfights and legendary standoffs are part of Old West lore, the average cowboy's life looked very different. Firearms were neither a daily tool nor a constant companion for these hard-working ranch hands who were more focused on honest labor than the quick draw. Cowboys had camel culture. Catch the joke? Camel culture. Like cancel culture, but with a hump. Okay, maybe not. Still, while cowboys may not have ridden horses as much as legends suggest, some did ride camels. Yes, camels. In the mid-19th century, the U.S. government introduced hundreds of camels to the Southwest, hoping these resilient creatures could handle American deserts as they did the Sahara. Arizona became a testing ground, and private importers even brought camels to California and Nevada, where the arid landscape suited them well. Unfortunately, this Camel Corps experiment was cut short. As the Civil War escalated, government priorities shifted, leaving the camel's future in limbo. In a surprising twist, Confederate raiders took advantage of the situation, freeing the camels from their camp. Released into the wild, these camels roamed the deserts of Arizona and California, creating some strange and unforgettable sightings. For years afterward, ranchers and landowners occasionally found these wandering camels, putting them to use on farms and ranches. When cowboys lacked horses, a camel was often the next best option. Riding one might not have been quite as romantic as a Mustang, but camels could endure long distances, low water supplies, and scorching heat, proving surprisingly practical for the western terrain. A horse of a different world. When you think of a cowboy, what do you picture? Probably a figure on horseback, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, sturdy boots, and a shiny belt buckle. But here's a surprising fact. While horses are a classic part of the cowboy image, many cowboys didn't ride nearly as much as you'd expect. In fact, the role of horses in the cowboy lifestyle changed drastically after a brutal winter in 1885. The winter of 1885 to 86 was exceptionally harsh, with brutal snowstorms and frigid temperatures wiping out herds by the thousands. Ranchers faced significant losses, with livestock and land heavily impacted by the severe weather. To protect their assets from another costly winter, ranch owners made changes that forever altered the cowboy way of life. Gone were the endless, open-range cattle drives of earlier years. Instead, ranchers began keeping their herds closer to home. As ranching adapted to new challenges, the cowboy's role shifted. Rather than ranging far afield, cowboys were increasingly tasked with duties like maintaining fences and managing livestock within defined areas. With more people settling across the West, urbanization also reduced the need for the frontier's rough and ready lifestyle. That's not to say horses disappeared from cowboy life. Many cowboys still relied on horses for work, but more often than not, the horses were owned by ranchers, not the cowboys themselves. Much like a company car today, horses were provided as needed rather than belonging to the workers. While many cowboys shared strong bonds with these animals, the role of the horse in cowboy culture became more about practicality than romanticized freedom. A cowboy's life. Discussing the realities of cowboy life may feel a bit uncomfortable, but it's essential to address the unvarnished truth. Life as a cowboy was anything but pristine. These men were often covered in dirt and grime, rarely enjoying the luxury of a proper bath. When they did manage to wash up, it typically involved a quick dip in a nearby pond or stream, rather than the soap and water routines we take for granted today. While the lack of cleanliness might seem like a minor issue, it was indicative of a more significant concern, namely, the health conditions that often plagued them. The medical understanding of the time was far less advanced than what we have today, which meant that treatment options were limited. Cowboys and the general population lack access to effective remedies, making control and treatment of these infections difficult. Although exact statistics on the disease's incidence remain elusive, historians agree that its impact was widespread and long-lasting. This not only affected the health and well-being of individual cowboys, but also posed a greater risk to the communities they inhabited. The discomfort associated with these infections was more than a minor nuisance. It could lead to serious complications. Imagine the pain and distress many cowboys endured, particularly during urination, which was a painful reminder of their lifestyles. Overall, the rugged image of the cowboy as a tough, self-reliant figure is complicated by the realities of their health, which reveals a more nuanced understanding of their lives on the frontier. In examining this aspect of cowboy culture, we gain insight into the often overlooked struggles faced by these men beyond their romanticized portrayals in popular media.
Please like and share if you find the video content interesting and useful. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below so as not to miss the upcoming interesting videos. Thanks for watching.